In episode 33, Exam Acronyms, Quick Audio Reference for Learners, we focus on giving you fast, memorable expansions for some of the most common terms you will see and hear in exam questions. Acronyms can feel like a foreign language when you start, and the sheer volume can be discouraging if you try to memorize them without context. The goal here is to pair each acronym with a simple meaning, a short mental picture, and a reminder of where it usually shows up in practice. As you listen, notice which ones already feel familiar and which still need repetition later. Over time, this kind of light, focused exposure turns awkward letter strings into comfortable vocabulary. A good place to start is the classic CIA triad, which stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality protects information from being seen by people or systems that should not have access, which you can picture as a curtain or lock around sensitive data. Integrity prevents unauthorized changes, making sure that what is stored or transmitted is accurate and trustworthy, like a seal that shows if something has been tampered with. Availability ensures that authorized users and processes can actually reach the systems and data they need when they need them, instead of facing outages and delays. When you see CIA in exam questions, think of it as the three-way balance that every control must support in some combination. Next comes the trio AAA, which expands to authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication answers the question, "Who are you?" by checking credentials like passwords, tokens, or certificates, and establishing identity. Authorization then asks, "What are you allowed to do?" by comparing that identity to roles, permissions, or policies before granting access to resources or actions. Accounting, sometimes called auditing, records what happened, when, and under which identity, creating logs and reports that show how systems were used. For exams, AAA helps you separate steps in an access scenario. First, prove identity. Then, grant or deny specific rights. And finally, record the activity for later review. Two important access models you will encounter are RBAC and ABAC, standing for Role-Based Access Control and Attribute-Based Access Control. Role-Based Access Control assigns permissions to roles, like Database Administrator or Support Agent, and then users receive permissions by being placed into those roles. Attribute-based access control uses attributes about users, resources, environments, or actions, such as department, location, time of day, or data sensitivity level, to decide whether access should be allowed. You can think of RBAC as grouping people into job buckets, and ABAC as evaluating a set of facts each time a decision is made. On exams, recognizing which model is described helps you choose controls that match flexibility and complexity requirements. Single sign-on and multi-factor authentication show up together often, so it helps to connect SSO and MFA in your mind. Single sign-on, or SSO, allows a user to authenticate once and then access multiple systems or applications without logging in again each time, relying on shared identity tokens or sessions. Multi-factor authentication, or MFA, requires more than one type of factor, such as something you know, something you have, or something you are, before granting access. When combined, SSO improves usability by reducing repeated logins, and MFA strengthens security at key entry points. On the exam, if a question mentions balancing user convenience with stronger access checks, SSO plus MFA is a common, well-aligned answer. Network and certificate questions often center around TLS and PKI,
which stand for Transport Layer Security and Public Key Infrastructure. Transport Layer Security is the protocol that encrypts data in transit between clients and servers, providing confidentiality and integrity for web traffic and many other communication channels.
Public key infrastructure is the system of certificates, certificate authorities, and trust relationships that allows parties to verify identities and keys used by TLS and similar mechanisms. You can picture TLS as the secure tunnel and PKI as the passport office and border control that verify who is at each end. In exam scenarios, these acronyms usually appear together when you are asked how to secure communications or validate remote identities. Protecting information from leaking or being misused involves another pair, DLP and DRM, which stand for Data Loss Prevention and Digital Rights Management. Data loss prevention focuses on detecting and blocking unauthorized movement of sensitive data, whether it is being emailed out, copied to removable media, or uploaded to uncontrolled cloud destinations. Digital rights management controls how protected content can be used and shared, often in the context of documents, media files, or software licenses, enforcing rules like view only or no printing. DLP is often network and endpoint centric, watching flows and actions, while DRM travels with the content itself. On the exam, seeing these acronyms should trigger thoughts about where controls live and how they enforce policy. When you think about monitoring and automated response, two dense acronyms appear together, SIEM and SOAR. SIEM stands for Security Information and Event Management, which means collecting, correlating, and analyzing logs and alerts from many sources to identify suspicious patterns. SOAR stands for Security, Automation, and Response, focusing on automating parts of the investigation and remediation workflow using playbooks and integrations. You can imagine SIEM as the central nervous system that senses and correlates signals, and SOAR as the automated reflexes that help respond more quickly and consistently. Exam questions that mention reducing detection time or standardizing response often hint at this pair working together. Development-focused questions frequently reference SDLC and SSDLC, which are the software development lifecycle and the secure software development lifecycle. The SDLC describes the stages of planning, designing, building, testing, deploying, and maintaining software, regardless of security concerns. The SSDLC embeds security activities into each of those stages, such as threat modeling, secure coding practices, security testing, and post-release monitoring. You can think of SSDLC as taking the familiar development pipeline and weaving security steps through it instead of bolting them on at the end. On exams, if the scenario calls for improving security without stopping delivery, SSDLC is a key concept to remember. Testing acronyms appear in pairs as well, starting with SAST and DAST, which stand for Static Application Security Testing and Dynamic Application Security Testing. Static testing, or SAST, analyzes source code or compiled artifacts without executing them, looking for patterns of insecure coding, misuse of APIs, or known vulnerability classes. Dynamic testing, or DAST, interacts with a running application from the outside, sending inputs and observing outputs to find issues such as injection flaws, broken authentication, or misconfigurations. SAST tends to integrate earlier in the development process, while DAST often runs against staging or pre-production environments. For exams, remembering that static equals code at rest
and dynamic equals application in motion can help you pick appropriate methods. A newer pair you will encounter is IAST and RASP, which expand to interactive application security testing and runtime application self-protection. Interactive testing, or IAST, instruments applications so that security analysis can happen while functional tests or normal usage occur, blending insights from both code and runtime behavior. Runtime application self-protection, or RASP, embeds security logic directly into the application or runtime to detect and block attacks as they happen, often without external gateways. You can picture IAST as a diagnostic harness wrapped around the app and RASP as an internal immune system reacting to abnormal behavior. Exam scenarios that mention in-app detection or runtime blocking without network changes often hint at these technologies. Detection and response on endpoints and beyond brings EDR and XDR into the mix, standing for endpoint detection and response and extended detection and response. Endpoint detection and response tools monitor and analyze activity on laptops, servers, and other endpoints, looking for suspicious processes, file changes, or behavior patterns. Extended detection and response expands this concept across multiple domains, correlating endpoint, network, identity, email, and cloud signals to build a broader view of attacks. EDR gives you depth on individual devices, while XDR aims for breadth across the environment. On exams, recognizing this difference helps you match tools to questions about local compromise versus cross-system incident visibility. By now, you have heard several acronym families, and the challenge is turning them into something you can recall quickly under exam pressure. One helpful habit is to repeat the toughest expansions aloud, focusing on a clean, steady rhythm rather than speed. For example, saying security information and event management a few times before SIEM reinforces the full phrase in your memory. Doing the same for security orchestration, automation, and response connects SOA to its meaning instead of treating it as random letters. When you rehearse expansions with your own voice, they become more familiar and less intimidating on the page. To close this quick reference, treat these acronyms less as a list to memorize and more as signposts that point to key ideas in security architecture and operations. As you study, bookmark mentally the terms that still feel slippery and plan short, focused rehearsal sessions where you cycle through 5 of them at a time. In each short session, say the letters, expand the phrase, and briefly remind yourself what problem the concept is meant to solve. This light, repeated exposure is far more effective than trying to cram dozens of unfamiliar strings the night before an exam. Over time, these acronyms will become comfortable tools in your vocabulary rather than obstacles in your way. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.